consumption goes from real to nearly zero. When you get to that zero boundary, that's where you have people doing really interesting things. And we borrow from photography again, because it's gone through the full cycle where cost of producing a camera became nominally zero because it became embedded in a different device that people were willing to pay for and weren't buying on the basis generally of the camera. And then the cost of utilizing that function fell to zero. One, for convenience. Again, the same question we ask. If someone gave you a free camera, would you take more photos? Some people say yes. Most people say no. They're like, do I have to carry it around, right? So it's the carrying around automatically of a camera that was one of the costs of consumption. And then the sharing dropped to zero. So what happened? Well, people did the darndest things with photos, right? So you would never have imagined 10 years ago someone saying, oh, do you have a copy? Oh, never mind. And they pull out their camera and they take a picture of whatever it is you were talking about, right? And who knew? There are more than 100 people who made fantastic livings, potentially better than all of ours, taking pictures of the food that they eat, right, worldwide. Like, I would kind of make fun of it 5 years ago, and like 10 years ago, I'm like, oh, I gotta be making that up. No one does that. And now, like, my daughter's like, do you know that, I can't remember her name, she got an endorsement for $700,000 from whomever it was for taking pictures of food, right? Anyway, so the unusual things happen when you hit these kind of zero boundaries, and they're actually quite hard to predict, right? That's my main point, which is it's hard to predict. Was there a question? No. Okay, so yeah.
I think you hit the nail on the head. Tesla is as close to artificial intelligent driving as we can get so far, thereabouts.
Yeah.
That's why people are driving it more, because it's reducing the transactional cost in terms of stress levels.
Yeah.
Driving.
Yeah.
It's not, you have to think about driving, but you think about driving a little less than you could.
Yeah. No, I think there's, and I think it's subconscious sometimes. Some people make the decision explicitly, but it's a little bit fuzzy. I'll acknowledge that I resisted Tesla for a long time. I teach venture capital. I ran a tech company. It was just too cliche for me. And then I test drove one, and then I bought a Tesla. So I bought a Tesla, and I just said fine with the cliche. And I'm not a car guy. Like, I like car issues, but not a car guy. I really love my Tesla, but I will tell you, I use the autopilot feature most on freeways in stop-and-go traffic. Like, the stress reduction is palpable. I don't do other things. I'm actually a very conservative driver. I don't particularly do other things, but it is fantastically more relaxing, right? And then, like, no sciatica. It's great. So I think there's a lot to this which is hard to identify in advance, but as we gather information, we will ask people, and we'll be like, oh, right? And someone will have mentioned it. We will all have thought of some of these things. So I think that's an important piece. And let me mention part of what drives this, and you're in the middle of this, so I suspect you appreciate this. I teach finance, and one of the things that most people don't understand, I bet you understand it, but almost no one can intuit. It actually requires a psychopathology to intuit exponential patterns. I like to borrow from Benjamin Franklin. He had this great saying in Farmer's Almanac that he would say, money makes money, and the money that makes money makes more money. It's called compounding. For scientists, it's called exponential progressions or geometric progressions. The way we can show it in finance, we would say the future value of some amount of cash at time zero, right now, times 1 plus whatever the rate of return is to the end, tells you how much cash you'll have in the future at a certain rate of compounding. So you don't have to memorize that, but it is the center of most modern finance that doesn't have to do with risk. So it's a geometric exponential. My one point to you, don't ever estimate these. I tell this to boards of directors all the time. They're always shocked, what $2.4 million deferred for 14 years at 11% interest will be. They're like, well, what's that, like 10, 11? I'm like, $173 million. They're like, how can that be? I'm like, because you estimated the geometric progression in your head. Don't do that, particularly with shareholder money, right? So don't estimate in your head. And I'm going to skip over it, and I'm going to go fast because I want to get to a couple more things before we switch to questions, but the question I pose to people as an experiment is I say, some National Science Foundation guy comes up, and it's legit, it's tax-free, it's not fraud, and he says to you, you can take the $10 million in the suitcase right now, or I will give you the result of the game of doubling a penny every day for a month, and you'll get the result of that. Which would you prefer? I've set you up to know that there's something going on here. So first, just real quick, how many people would pick the 10 million US to start? Just take that instead of the game thing. Anyway, I'll tell you, I live this, and the honest answer for me would be, I would take the 10 million right then and there, because no matter what the outcome, I think it's a really good day, and I just wouldn't believe it. But knowing I'm supposed to have you believe the other.
I would take 10 million because I know you're not good for the
Right, no, exactly. Right. It's a reflection of, my trustworthiness at some level. But the first question is a legal question. What's the most important thing you ask this gentleman before you say you'll take the doubling thing? I had an ambiguous term in there. Double it for a month. What does that mean? Which month, right? Yeah, so I was like, wait, is it February? Even in a leap year, you're still really badly off. So if you pick the wrong month, it's like 1.7. If you pick a 31-day month, it's 10.7. What you'd ask is, do we get to double it on the first day? Because then it's 21.4. It's really good. What I then ask, by the way, is say, let's say you did that for another month. What's the number you end up with? This is always to prove a point about do not estimate these.
billion squared.
Billion squared, okay.
Cents.
Yeah, it's 22.
More money than it is.
Yeah, it's 22 quintillion, which is it's the number of zeros after the first digit, so it's 15 zeros afterwards, right? No, you guys are sciencey, and I set you up. I can beat the board of directors if they'll say $1.5 billion. I'm like, try a bigger number, and they'll get to 5 trillion, right? There we go. My point though is, it's easy to grow impatient at the beginning of this kind of geometric progression, and then it's easy to lose track when we really turn the corner. We live in a world in which we keep telling people we're about to turn the corner, but we do eventually turn the corner. Once we turn the corner from a regulator's viewpoint or a social innovator's viewpoint, everything goes crazy because you got used to kind of being able to keep up, and then you can't, right? So I think we're on the verge of that, and as we did this was a real phenomenon, right? Kodak identified the phenomenon. Kodak has the first patent on digital camera, right? Kodak identified the phenomenon as a threat in '97. They had a board-level retreat about it in 2002, and they set up a 5-year study. But they knew that the cost was falling at 60% per year, and if you'd done the math for 4 years, they should have realized that they were dead in the water in 3 years, which they were bankrupt in 3.5 years, right? So they set up a policy to study what was going to kill them that took longer than the geometric progression, and they had the data in front of them. Very frustrating, right? Lots of other factors, of course, but I'm going to skip this, but again, my main point is when cost of consumption reaches this really low point, when you give people free driving that's free of their time, what happens? Lots of interesting stuff. I want to highlight the kind of diagram, which is old news. I think actually this was shared with the original work, but shared with Nissan once upon a time. What happens here is you have in the United States this funny line. This big black line that cuts across it is bisecting the range of driving capacity. So we have trained driver in their prime. Former race car driver just decided they want to go fast anymore. It doesn't go fast. 37-year-old well-trained male or female average driver, young, old, or bad driver, various impairments, blind, child, heart attack, right? So you go up that axis and we go from great driver to really bad driver. In the United States, with a few very narrow exceptions, we simply say, let's check, and then when we check, you're either above or below the line. End of story, right? There are some modest adjustments to that, but they're in the private market around insurance, right? So we kind of nudge you in different directions, but you have permission to drive. It's whether or not you can afford your insurance, right? And then if you look at this axis, all I'm doing is I'm taking really, in pouring rain, there's pedestrians. It's the dress up as a fire hydrant school day, and you're going through a construction zone, bad for autonomous vehicles, all the way to all autonomous vehicle or modern expressway, right? So that's a range of how good can our technology handle it. It turns out that the boundary for the tech capacity is moving down and to the left. What does that mean? It means the more complex environments are becoming more navigable, and we can beat more drivers in more situations, right? So the relatively competent driver, who is neither old nor a bad driver nor young, but is at risk of being sleepy, we can beat that driver on a well-designed freeway, right? So the 2 a.m. driver after a 20-hour day is probably better off using a Tesla autopilot for portions of that drive than unless they actually fall asleep completely. But now it'll beat them, right? It'll force them to wake up. But so the point though is that this is moving over time, and we still have this weird straight bar. So why do I care? Why do we care? Well, it turns out that all of this up here, where no one drives, is a tremendous amount of uncaptured utility, right? So when you reach a certain age and you can't drive yourself to an appointment for a doctor, you have to have someone drive, you have to pay someone to do it, or some combination. It would be highly utility enhancing at a kind of irrational level, by the way, when you look at the surveys, for people to be able to empower themselves to be driven, right? Or to make it marginally very costless for them to do it, because we have a much better network of transportation about point to point, et cetera. So right now, this various, like just this line, prevents us from capturing any of this utility, even if, by the way, that line of technology moves far enough over that we're better. But more importantly, for right now, we've got this weird problem where we know sometimes that our technology, or soon, definitely very often, our technology is better than the driver. And if only they would use the technology, there would be fewer accidents. It would be better. We have no means, and maybe we should, of compelling them to do that, right? And that gap is going to get wider and wider. There will be more and more instances in which people can actually do better by handing over the driving to an autonomous system. And when that starts to happen, we've got lots of complicated questions. Do you force people to choose the safer, better route? So what that means as a kind of practical matter is you throw out this early 20th century, when we put in a licensing regime, we didn't have the ability to do anything but draw a big front line. It made perfect sense at the time, right? We didn't know we could dynamically measure the environment of the routes. We didn't know we could know exactly how capable the car is, including its hydroplane risk at any given moment, the status of its brakes, its current weight relative to its stopping capacity. We didn't know we could know everything about the driver if we really, really wanted to, right? Over time, certainly build up a big profile. And we had no sense that we could have an enforcing moment where you get in a car and you sit down and the car says, tell me where you want to go. And you say where you want to go. And it says, oh, we have 3 choices today. I can drive, in which case we're going this way. If you really want to drive, you have to go this way, by the way, because it's 2 a.m. and I'm not going to put you on a freeway, and I'm not going to do this, I'm not going to do that. Or if the rain gets worse, we can't drive. We're just sitting here. Or you can, have some other choices. You can have a special Uber vehicle that gets you to nighttime party driver or something, right? So the interesting question is, do you want to enforce that? Would you like to do that? And I'll show you the final. Here's the 3 things. Context. We have tremendous capacity for situational awareness, increasingly even those that are outside the car at the time the car is driving. We have a big understanding of capacity, certainly the vehicle, right, in real time, and increasingly driver, maybe opt-in, induced by various incentives, including insurance. And finally, we have the ability to take all that together and optimize. We have a customizable operational envelope that we know that would maximize utility and minimize the externalities, everything from noise to time to risk to accidents, everything, right? And so if you can do that, do you want to do that? And I'll end with kind of this stylized view of what people think this does to the universe of accidents. So first, what most legislators seem to think is that here's the accidents that happen, here's how much driving there is. If only we had autonomous vehicles, then you get the orange accidents and we all win. It's really good, right? Then they say, oh, wait a minute, I just read this story about auto driver gone wild and it kills lots of people. So then say, wait, okay, actually, you have all this driving, this was the accidents, and now you have crazy new accidents. I don't know if I like the orange thing, it's just shaped differently, but I'm not sure if you're saving everybody. Incorrect, but that's still the impression. And if they think about it, they get a consultant, they say, wait, the universe of driving expands. Because I will commute to Sacramento for a presentation if I can work on the way there and on the way back, right? And a lot of us will change our consumption of driving if the marginal cost is 0. And so then they say, wait, now you have accidents in the new driving arena, because there's not a 0 accident rate for new expanded driving. You have the novel accidents, and you have some of the old accidents that go away. Like we don't run into each other just on a freeway because, we're paying attention. Here's what happens if you manage to do this enforced envelope, right? So if you say, context, your capacity, where you're going, we can say, yes, you can go to Sacramento, Dan, but I need to drive for the following reasons, because that has a better probabilistic risk of having fewer accidents and better outcomes. Or, yeah, Dan, you can drive right now in this ridiculous rainstorm to Walgreens to pick up some, something, like power drink or whatever, but you gotta drive. Because if you make me drive, I can't see it in the rain, right? So you could then create accidents will exist for every situation in driving, but only novel to that increase. And you will still get this little bump, right? There will always be accidents that are new because of what we've done, but they're unusual. It's the kid dressed up as a garbage can is dressed up as a kid, one rolls down the street. You can't blame the car for getting confused. So that scenario is hard to achieve without having kind of slightly icky big brother kind of authoritarian scenarios, and I'll stop there. That's the kind of interesting point where I think we want to that's the optimized utility, but I'm not sure it's the optimized social happiness. Let me stop and answer questions. I skipped over some stuff. I'm always afraid to call him Brad, but it's always a good question. Brad.
Yeah, that's only because it's going to be very ironic.
Okay.
On your chart, you have this, you don't think technology improves, it's
Right.
moving the line.
Yes.
And I think you've done the error of making an estimate of geometric progression, right? Which is to say,
Hitting the line just goes.
if the line moves
Yeah.
really fast, if we get better and better and Moore's law
Right.
applies all the time, then this moves
The whole
so
everything goes
fast
away.
that by the time you finish this talk,
Yeah,
you've
yeah.
solved the problem in the talk. So that's of course not true.
Yeah, yeah.
But by the time the policymakers have
Yeah.
tried to apply
You're
what
totally
the
right.
lesson you have given us, we will have solved it. I mean, I make this ironic comment about infrastructure changes for self-driving cars. So the problem with infrastructure changes is it's going to create construction zones so
Yeah.
the cars now have to drive around because the software guy solved the problem 3 years ago, but there's still a
Agreed.
construction zone to put in there. So this
Yeah.
is, that's where I thought you were going when you talked about how we can speed up how policymakers think about this, because otherwise you will get the exact problem.
You're absolutely right. So what you're describing is they debate a particular style of this, and by the time they're done implementing, the actual lines have moved dramatically. In fact, they get complex at the
Oh
boundaries.
yeah, they're not straight lines.
Right, they're all curvy and crazy. But here's the solution, I think, which is to adopt a dynamic optimal outcome method. So you say, listen, there's no clear answer until you ask, where are you going, what's the situation, what are the conditions, and what's the envelope, and what's the acceptable range? And that's the, right? Which, by the way, has some weird implications. It means the fancier and nicer, the newer, more proven your car is, the more often you drive, the better you can drive. You can go into the lane that only puts a foot and a half between vehicles speeding at 80 kilometers an hour. And if you have that older version or you haven't updated, you've got to go 2 lanes over, which has a 10 feet separation. I mean, there's all sorts of weird implications which you can enforce, I think, through private incentives. I'm not sure that's superior, but it'll work. A marketplace of kind of dynamic optimization will allow the adaptation a lot faster. The question is, can you actually get this sort of what feels like a loosey-goosey, we're going to have this moving, we're going to have this moving condition, which is we want everything to always operate in the relative 55th percentile of, actuarial safety if it's autonomous, and you can't do anything with that. And you say we're only looking back 4 quarters or 12 months. And what happens is things get better, that line keeps moving. So then you have to innovate. And if someone leaps way ahead, you've got some interesting applications, but it self-regulates. Now, I've oversimplified the fact that
The car has some of these capabilities is one thing. The government making policy about the car's capabilities is another thing. Aside from the fact that there's this low speed of it and incompetence, and I mean the non-pejorative sense of
Lower
the word,
eye.
that they
Yes,
do
yes.
not have that capability in a sense. That's not going to make that happen. And then there's the liability. As soon as there's regulation applying it,
Yeah.
great fear of liability. If I claim my car can do X and the government says if you claim that you're responsible if you don't do X, suddenly you create a fear that causes excessive conservative estimation of your actual ability, thus possibly causing more accidents to happen.
So two thoughts, and then I want to ask some questions.
Yeah, sorry.
One, no, sorry. It's a great question. Great point. One, I have a very optimistic, highly confident view about the ability of the insurance industry to inject itself and help make this happen in a better way than it might otherwise. Particularly, and here's the kind of delineation. Particularly if we don't criminalize anything. So you realize that like civil insurance structures break really fast if you can cross over from civil liability to criminal liability. We've got a lot of that in the driving arena. So if we can kind of shore that up, then I think there's a lot of really well-aligned interests, at least in the first like 10 or 20 or 30 years. Insurance companies will have to diversify. But I think there's the ability to align interests and then have people work out in the marketplace. Maybe I'm overly optimistic about the ability of legislators to get it right. But I'll talk to you afterwards. Yeah, question.
All right, Allison's got a question you can ask. And they're going to self-insure.
That's it. Yeah.
So, fundamental part of regulation is licensing drivers. And I had a conversation with a famous person that a lot of people know, Richard M. Stallman, about how should the government permit autonomous vehicle control system. His response, his reaction to which I'm curious to hear what the person said. He said, give the car the same driver's test, without driver in it, but we get the human drivers now. And if it passes, we should be able to operate freely on the public roads. Does that make sense or not?
Yeah, so I think it's a sensible answer in the context, but I think it's a bad answer overall, right? Because I think you're trying to pretend that autonomous vehicles have all the potential same strengths and weaknesses as drivers. And one of the things, for example, the driver's test doesn't do is persistent attention. We know autonomous vehicles have the best possible persistent attention, way better than humans because we're not designed for that. So you can't test that unless it's going to be a 17-hour test in which 4 hours of it are on the freeway with nothing happening, right? So I think it both underestimates the strengths and it overestimates or overemphasizes the weaknesses, but it's a sensible answer. Here's what so there's kind of the curve of how people answer that question, then there's the kind of fringes, and then there's like the crazy people. So I'm going to give you the crazy people answer, which I think I might adhere to, and it's the following from a regulatory viewpoint. If anyone's heard this before, raise your hand, because I want to know who you heard from. I'm hoping someone thinks this. So if you think about the ADA, right, Americans with Disabilities Act, you have a formal, government. It started with government infrastructure, then public entity infrastructure, then private. So it phased in across 20 years. And the idea was that if a reasonable accommodation could be had to achieve a particular life function that was deemed critical or vital, reasonable accommodations had to be made. So you had to put ramps in place. You had to do all these things. So here's my view in light of kind of social sentiment and the aging of the baby boomers. I think the Americans with Disabilities Act will soon enough be invoked rather pointedly and say, you've got to improve your freeways, you've got to improve the parking lots, you've got to improve parking garages, you've got to improve all this stuff. Because there's this technology, an autonomous vehicle, and but for you setting stuff up poorly, basically not letting there be a ramp in this building with stairs, I can't get there because I can only use autonomous vehicles to do it because I'm impaired, because I'm old, and by the way, there's 78 million of you. And we vote at a rate of 2 to 1 on people under 30. And I think that's going to be, it's going to be an accommodation limit test. So it's not the car itself, it's what I, as an impaired driver, can get done with the help of the car if only you would A, B, C, D. Has anyone heard that? Okay, I need to block it. You think that's crazy? I warned you. I told you that's crazy. Well, no, it's AARP, so it's the AARP law, but it'll be the Americans with Disabilities Act, which is the entry point. You probably have no reason to pay attention to this, but places like the University of Arizona, University of Minnesota, they spent extraordinary amounts of money fighting for 5, 10, 12 years in the end, saying we can't spend $30 million pouring cement on all of our buildings so we can have ramps. We just can't. They lost. Everyone lost, just so you know. And I think it's probably a good thing, by the way. But if they can lose, then eventually Palo Alto's parking garage, because Palo Alto can be, you just have to spend, I'm making this up, $800,000, and most people in 5 years with autonomous vehicle technology take their hand off the wheel after they pull into their garage. They just sit there until it parks, right? We kind of know, tell me if I'm wrong, we kind of know that's doable at a certain infrastructure level. So the question. Right, but if you have a hard garage which is got misparked stuff and isn't beaconed correctly, I mean, there's also, I'm not a technologist, but I think if I'm remembering this correctly, there are things you can do to infrastructure that really advance both the accuracy and the capacity of autonomous vehicles to do what they need to do. Among them, for example, put car-to-car communications in every municipal and county vehicle that exists, like make it mandatory. No? You're always a contrarian.
Yeah.
I know.
That's a shopping, so I'll explain to you later.
All right, no, it's good. I told you, I warned you, it's crazy.
So, but part of that would be map the garage, for example,
There
right?
you
So
go.
let's say it's a private garage, is a map available to that autonomous vehicle?
Right.
That would be
And that's easy, because they say the marginal cost in the end is very low anyway. Question in the back. Oh, sorry, you're running the queue, are we?
Wait, who did I give the microphone to? Al.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you very much for the information you introduced. New things, at least for me.
It's more speculation than information, I appreciate it.
What I'm struggling with is in terms of self-driving cars. Is it going to come sooner or later? Should be more harder? Make it safer, make it less safe, make it more expensive, cheaper?
Yeah.
And what else could be it?
Yeah, sure. So I don't think I know enough, and I'm sure there are some who know, but it seems like there's a reasonable debate about will it happen sooner or later, right? That's hard because part of it is that what do you define as the autonomous vehicle? What I can speak to with a modest amount of authority is I suspect it will be much bigger than we expect. And what I mean by that is the ramifications will be much more far-reaching because among other things, you'll be able to do things in a vehicle which you couldn't do before. So that's easy to imagine. It's like I will do work and I will read a book, I will watch a movie. That's easy, but one of the reasons we take cars from point to point is because certain places are better suited for an activity. So I think I had the teaser for this talk. I talked about how maybe people will now drive to a place, but not park and get out for the meeting. They'll actually make people get into their car for the meeting because, you know, parking and getting up to the place in the building is more onerous than simply pulling up in front of the building and getting in the car and everyone kind of spinning around into the center and then talking a meeting. You never have to park, you get to do other things. Maybe you actually get to go somewhere that you need to go. So, and that's an easy example, but a sort of non-obvious one, like inverting the use of buildings and reverting the use of cars. I think those kinds of things will crop up all the time. An easy one that's done is mash up 3D printing and autonomous vehicles, or delivery services and autonomous vehicles. So 3D printing, it takes a technician now to do very high commercial 3D printing. It really does, to monitor. You can have all sorts of things go wrong. That same gamer son of mine is a 3D fanatic, right? I guess in two types here, both resin and extrusion is great. So what will eventually happen, he's like, Dad, I need a much better, I need a, I think he said 10 micron. I'm like, do they have 10 micron 3D printers? He's like, yes, it's absolutely necessary. And you can like go online, you can order it, and then it gets shipped to you. So autonomous vehicles will allow a highly paid technician to be in the back of a truck that has a high-end 3D printer, and it dispatches and prints on the way. And so you can order your very important 3D printed part for the bike shop or the car shop or the dental office, and it arrives in an hour. But that took in-motion and technical assistance all at the same time, and that would be possible. So that's another example. So my answer to you is I don't know if it'll be slow or fast. I don't know how to make it cheaper, though over time it will get cheaper. But I think it's going to surprise you at every single turn. I think we will just be as surprised as we are, and we revise how we think of things, but as surprised as you are about how much the smartphone is embedded into your life. Would you have predicted this 10 years ago? No, there's just no way. I think phones were a part of what we did, and communication was a part of what we did. Transportation is equally, if not more so, embedded in every piece of our society, so I think the impact will be much bigger than expected. Sorry, that was a long answer. Yeah.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
So thanks for presenting, I really appreciate it. I guess, looking at the regulatory, progression, I don't think it's just going to be a smooth curve. There's going to be a lot of phases, Then there's going to be, you're going to go through a phase, then there'll be advancement, and all of a sudden there'll be a progression.
Yeah.
Things like to change. When you think about, looking at other technologies perhaps, but just thinking about this one, what kind of phases do you think we're going to go through? I mean,
Yeah.
of course, the first one's going to be who's to blame when someone has an accident.
Right. Yeah.
Then
Yeah.
the next one's going to be like, adding in things to
Yes.
make it accidents less. But
So there are a couple things. So if you look at the internet, so let's take that technology, highly radical, transformative, transparent, not centrally controlled, kind of scary to regulators, and then very liability inducing from a libel slander, point in lots of ways, and from a copyright infringement, and you name it. So we created an immunity bubble, right, for the internet. So we created the ability to hold providers and intermediary parties immune so long as they complied once they were given notice. This is huge, and it allows for the growth of the internet in a way that probably wouldn't happen. People, same thing with small plane aviation. So general aviation, if you don't follow this, you may not know, but we went through a period where everyone went bankrupt, right? And then we created a carve-out, and that carve-out expires very, very soon, by the way, in 20 months. But will probably be renewed, and it enabled the aviation, to thrive. So let's go to autonomous vehicles. I think there are a couple of things that will happen. First, I call it the segue risk. What you don't want to have happen is municipalities who are relatively ill-informed, bad rulemakers, to weigh in disproportionately. So you want federal preemption, you want state dominance. Right? Federal preemption, I think, in a lot of ways would be better, but we have a state system. But truly, you don't want Atherton setting their own standards as to what's okay and what isn't, because I don't know if you remember the Segway story. It turns out it wasn't a real story, but it ran through all these city councils in California that a Segway, they lost control, knocked a woman and her baby in the street, baby got run over, terrible, terrible, have to ban Segways. Like many municipalities had hearings and banned Segways from sidewalks. Was it the right thing or the wrong thing to do? I don't know. Was it the wrong reason? For sure. It actually turned out to be 10 years ago, early fake news, right? So I think the answer is some of the bumps will be mitigated if we push it up, avoid municipalities, and then kind of drive this analysis in kind of a big picture way. Beyond that, it's going to be awful, but I think I have confidence car manufacturers, insurers, and all the other service providers actually form a fairly sophisticated and powerful lobbying entity. And if they can kind of align well enough, I think it'll work out well. And then, again, back to I think the AARP and some other big players who have constituencies who benefit from this will also
Okay, so there's a lot more questions out there, but we're already past 7:30, so if Dan can stay a few more minutes, you're welcome to come and talk, and we'll probably start turning the lights off in about 30 minutes. But let's hear a round of applause for Dan.